Yo, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Digital Newsroom. Today is Monday, June 22nd. Got a couple of strong stories today. Our strongest of which probably is coming out of the United Kingdom with their Prime Minister Keir Starmer. And we also have some updates on Iran and Switzerland. Yo, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to. And yeah, so let's just get straight into it. Keir Starmer has resigned as the UK Prime Minister. This morning in London, a tearful Keir Starmer stood outside 10 Downing Street, and he announced that he is resigning as the leader of the Labour Party and as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Less than 2 years after leading Labour to a historic landslide election victory, he leaves having lost the confidence of his own parliamentary party. And his likely successor, Andy Burnham, he is the former popular mayor of the Greater Manchester who just won a by-election last week and arrived in London by train this morning to be sworn into Parliament. And the UK is now looking at its 7th Prime Minister in 10 years. And today is also the 10th anniversary of the Brexit vote, the decision that started the revolving door. And in segment 2, I want to go deep into this story right here. And yeah, so we'll cover that more in a second. Our next headline for today is Switzerland talks conclude and the IAEA inspectors are going back into Iran. So the first round of high-level U.S.-Iran talks at Lake Lucerne were wrapped this morning after an 18-hour marathon session. And the headline outcome was Iran agreed to invite IAEA nuclear inspectors back into the country, the UN's nuclear watchdog that Iran had barred after the February war began. Vice President Mance saying on the matter, quote, "That is a major milestone for the American people and the first step in permanently ending a nuclear weapons program in Iran." And mediators in Qatar and Pakistan are encouraging progress, and that is a 60-day roadmap guaranteed, and technical talks are going to begin immediately. There's one caveat to this, and that is that Donald Trump has actually threatened to, quote, "hit Iran very hard again." While Vance was literally sitting at the table, Iran's delegation refused a joint photo with U.S. officials, and this is diplomacy under significant strain. The full update will be in our lightning round coming later. And our next headline is we're just a little market summary. So oil is falling, and SpaceX has hit $2.1 trillion, and the PCE is coming this week. So Brent crude is roughly down about 1.7% this morning, towards $79 as Iran talk progress continuing to push these energy prices down. And the S&P 500 Dow, they were both muted at the open, and investors are watching the Iran nuclear talks and waiting for the PCE inflation report later this week. And SpaceX closed on Friday, 160.95, up 19% from its $135 IPO price. Now valued at 2.1 trillion, surpassing Tesla as the 7th largest company in the world. And the Fed held rates steady last week, but signaled a hawkish lean. Nearly half of the Federal Open Market Committee members now expect a rate increase before the year end. The PCE data this week will tell us if the expectation will harden, and the full picture will come later. And moving on to our second segment here. So Keir Starmer has resigned as the United Kingdom's Prime Minister. And I'm going to build this from the ground up because to understand why Starmer is gone, you need to understand how he got there and what went wrong and what comes next for a country that is on its 7th Prime Minister in a decade. So, who is Keir Starmer? So, Keir Starmer, 63, is a former human rights barrister and former director of public prosecutions. He is the head of the Crown Prosecution Service, and he entered politics as an MP in 2015. He became Labour leader in 2020 after the party's catastrophic 2019 general election defeat under Jeremy Corbyn, the worst Labour result since 1935. His job in opposition was to drag back Labour to electability, and he did it. In July 2024, Labour won a landslide general victory, getting 174-seat majority in the House of Commons, ending 14 years of Conservative rule. And that was less than 2 years ago. He was celebrated as the man who brought Labour back from the dead. And some of the things that went wrong were some of the scandals. Starmer appointed Peter Mandelson, a close friend of the late Jeffrey Epstein, as British ambassador to Washington, and that generated significant backlash in both the UK and in the US. And the Epstein connection was the Mandelson appointment was politically toxic at a moment when Epstein documents were making headlines globally. And the economics promise gap was that Starmer inherited a UK economy damaged by Brexit, COVID, and the energy price shocks. He promised growth and change, and per NPR, voters felt that he failed to deliver palpable change after austerity and budget cuts under 14 years of previous Conservative Party rule. And it looks like we got a bit of breaking news coming in here from Fox. There appears to have been a shooting in Montreal. So let's give me a moment while I pull this up. Okay, so yeah, we got a few sources right here. You're looking at one police officer injured and another newsroom sites. So Montreal police officer was killed and others were wounded in a shooting attack in the coast. That's a very cool name. In Canada, according to local reports, the target was a Jewish business. And around 11:30 a.m. Canada time, the SPVM posted an imminent threat alert that an armed and dangerous suspect is in the CN sector. Locals reported 20 to 30 shots being fired. A heavily Jewish area with numerous kosher restaurants, a Chabad Jewish school, and Jewish community centers. And 2 police officers and a civilian were injured in this attack, and the operation is ongoing. However, one suspect is confirmed neutralized, and one policeman has been confirmed to have later died. And this is some pretty horrible news to come out. We certainly hope that everyone in the situation will come out on the other side safely and soundly. And of course, it's always a tragedy when we lose our armed officers in law enforcement. So I'll keep us updated on that on our website and on our Instagram. And with that being said, and that news being covered, we'll go back to our conversation about Keir Starmer and the British Prime Minister and their politics. So, as we previously said, so some of the scandals that Keir Starmer had faced during his time as the UK Prime Minister was that he appointed Peter Mandelson as the British ambassador to Washington. Now, Peter Mandelson was a close friend of the late Jeffrey Epstein, which obviously would generate significant backlash in both the United Kingdom and the United States. And with that Epstein connection, the Mandelson appointment was still politically toxic at a moment when Epstein documents were still making headlines globally. And there was also a bit of an economic gap in his, economic promises. And Starmer inherited a UK economy that was damaged by Brexit, COVID, and energy price shocks. He promised growth and change, and per NPR, voters felt he failed to deliver palpable change after austerity and budget cuts under 14 years of previous Conservative Party rule. And from Reform UK, Nigel Farage's hard-right anti-immigration party, they made historic gains in May local elections, and Labour lost more than 1,000 council seats. An ISPOS poll published on Friday shows that 50% of Britons thought that Starmer would resign, up 5 points from May. And the internal revolt following the May local election disaster, Labour MPs began openly calling for him to step down. And former Health Secretary Wes Streeting was resigned from the cabinet in May, and the dam broke when Burnham won the Makerfield by-election last Wednesday. And in Starmer's own words this morning, he said, quote, "The question my party is asking is now whether I am best placed to lead us into the next general election. I have heard the answer from my parliamentary party, and to that question I accept that answer with good grace. Every decision I have taken about putting the country first, the country that I love first, which is why I will resign." End quote. He is framing this as a selfless act. Whether that reads that way to the British public is for them to decide, and is also a separate question. So, Andy Burnham, who is this guy, and why is he even in the conversation to likely become Britain's next Prime Minister? Oops. So this right here is Andy Burnham. He is 56 and the former mayor of Greater Manchester, a city region of 2.8 million people. He held that position for 8 years, making him one of the longest serving and most recognizable Labour politicians in the country outside of London. And he's known for being a plain-spoken northern working class political style, a focus on public health and social care, He has strong opposition to austerity and is critically for the current political moment the ability to beat Reform UK in their own territory. And as of last Wednesday, on June 18th, Burnham won the Makerfield by-election, a seat in suburban Manchester where Reform UK had recently swept all the local council seats. And he won decisively, and that result is why Starmer's fate was sealed. This morning, Burnham arrived at Manchester Piccadilly station and he boarded the train to London, which was sworn into Parliament, and within hours confirmed he will stand for the Labour leadership. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, who had been viewed as his main rival, endorsed him this morning. So with Streeting out, Burnham appears to be running essentially unopposed. The Eurasia Group predicts that Burnham will take office on July 18th or 19th, 5 days before a scheduled UK-EU summit, which would give him an immediate opportunity to signal his approach to European relations. And this is why the Brexit anniversary matters here. So today, which is June 22nd, is the 10th anniversary of the Brexit referendum vote. June 23rd is the actual anniversary, but Starmer's resignation fell the day before it. And in the 10 years since Brexit, 6 prime ministers have come and gone: Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss, Sunak, and Starmer. Burnham would be the 7th. And according to NPR analysis from former Blair political secretary John McTernan, he said, quote, "This is a period in which Britain has done the most to harm itself by leaving the European Union." And the economic damage from Brexit, combined with the 2008 financial crisis aftermath and COVID, created conditions for the political instability that has produced this revolving door. Burnham's political positioning is that he is notably more pro-European than Starmer was. A UK-EU summit 5 days after he potentially takes office is not a coincidence in the scheduling. And a dimension with Donald Trump that's worth to note is that Trump posted about this on this morning about Starmer, said that he, quote, "failed badly on 2 very important subjects, immigration and energy," end quote. He also called for the UK to, quote, "expand its drilling in the North Sea," end quote. And the Trump-Starmer relationship had become increasingly splintered amid the fallout of the Iran war per time. And Starmer, who is a firm NATO ally, had been very critical of elements of Trump's foreign policy approach. And with Burnham's relationship with Trump is actually unknown. His politics are significantly to the left of what Trump will typically endorse, and that dynamic will be worth watching from the first phone call. And what this is going to mean for the bigger picture here. So we're going to put this in the frame that it deserves, because 7 prime ministers in 10 years is not a political curiosity, it is a governance crisis. So the list that we're looking at since the Brexit vote in June 2016 is, first is David Cameron. He resigned the morning after the Brexit vote, and he called and he lost. Theresa May spent 3 years negotiating Brexit, but was resigned after she was unable to get it through the Parliament. And Boris Johnson forced out in July 2022 after a wave of ministerial resignations over the Pincher scandal. Liz Truss, the shortest serving prime minister in British history, about 44 days, resigned after a budget that crashed the pound, and Rishi Sunak called and lost the 2024 election in a landslide. And Keir Starmer resigned this morning, and Andy Burnham is expected to be the incoming prime minister. And now all these departures had one thing in common. So for Cameron, a referendum that he created destroyed him, and for May, a negotiation she couldn't close destroyed her. Johnson, a self-inflicted scandal. Truss had an economic incompetence. Sunak had electoral rejection, and Starmer lost his own party before he lost the public. And what Burnham's going to inherit, per CNBC, is that the UK economy has had a, quote, decrease in undocumented immigration, and, quote, increased government spending on defense and healthcare. Under Starmer, there are legitimate achievements, but voters clearly wanted faster, more fundamental change. Reform UK's rise is a structural problem Burnham will face immediately. Nigel Farage's party has won now more local councillors, councillors, and than Labour in some regions. And in the May elections, Reform won council seats across traditional Labour heartlands in the North and Midlands, in exactly the territory Burnham won in Makerfield. And his pitch is that he's the only Labour politician who has demonstrated he can beat Reform on their own ground. And the EU summit is actually on July 24th, and that's the first test. So under Starmer, the UK began tentatively rebuilding ties with the European Union, a reset that was cautious and slow. And Burnham has consistently indicated that he would go further and potentially close a closer trade relationship, even if not full EU membership. And this summit is going to be his first major set piece, and the signal he's going to send here will define whether his premiership begins with momentum. The UK has been waiting in a state of political turbulence since June of 2016, and whether Andy Burnham can break that cycle is the question that British politics will be organized around for the next few years, and we'll be watching that. And moving on from that story and coming back over to Iran and Switzerland and the United States in these negotiations, the first round of U.S. talks at the Bergenstock Resort on Lake Lucerne in Switzerland wrapped this morning after 18 hours of negotiations. Teams led by Vice President Vance and Iran's Parliament Speaker Ghalibaf, same man who signed the Memorandum of Understanding on June 17th, and 4 outcomes are confirmed by mediators Qatar and Pakistan. So they finally have a 60-day roadmap toward a final deal. Technical working groups will begin immediately. And Hormuz deconfliction mechanism, which is a direct communication line between parties to prevent incidents in the Strait from escalating. A Lebanon deconfliction cell, a framework to keep the Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire from collapsing, and Iran invited IAEA inspectors back. And that is the nuclear watchdog that Iran expelled after the February war. Vance called this, quote, a major milestone and the first step in permanently ending a nuclear weapons program in Iran. And Iran's finance minister Arigachi, confirmed major progress and said that oil exports are now waived and the blockade is lifted and some frozen assets are released and a reconstruction plan for Iran is being launched. The friction, however, is that Trump has posted threats to, quote, hit Iran very hard again. And while Vance was at the table, the Iranian state media briefly reported talks were suspended and then resumed. And Iran's delegation also refused to be photographed with U.S. officials. And from Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel is going to remain in southern Lebanon, quote, as long as necessary, and he will, quote, not allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons, and the Lebanon deconfliction cell is the first real test of whether the deal can survive Israeli operations. So IAEA inspectors going back into Iran is pretty significant. Iran expelling them after the war began and removing all international visibility into its nuclear program, now getting them back into the precondition for any serious nuclear verification, and the 60-day clock is now running with more structure than it had before in Switzerland. And our market brief for today, we had oil falling and SpaceX surpassing Tesla, and the PCE is incoming. So Brent crude was down 1.7% this morning towards the $79 barrel, and Iran talk progress is driving this continued energy price relief, and WTI is also falling. And before the war, Brent was roughly around $70 to $72, so the gap is narrowing. And in stocks, the S&P 500 and Dow muted the open. Markets waiting for this week's key data rather than reacting to a single catalyst. SpaceX closed Friday at $160.95 a share, up 19% from its $135 IPO price, and its market cap $2.1 trillion. Now surpassing Tesla at $1.5 trillion, making SpaceX the 7th largest public company in the world behind Nvidia, Alphabet, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, and the Taiwan Semiconductor. And from the Federal Reserve, last week's FOMC meetings held rates but delivered a hawkish signal. Nearly half of the FOMC members now expect that at least one rate increase before the year end, and that is a significant shift in the committee's internal direction. And this week's key data is the PCE inflation report. And the Federal Reserve's preferred inflation measure with Iran deal progress making oil fall, and core CPI already at 2.9%. The PCE number will tell us whether the Fed's hawkish lean firms up or softens, so that's what we are here to watch for. And a bit of a briefing. So France has dropped Palantir over their, quote, strategic dependency concerns. So France's Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu, announced that France's domestic intelligence service wants to drop Palantir's AI data tools in favor of a French domestic provider. their prime minister is saying, quote, "We must use our own AI models, and we cannot accept strategic dependencies in the digital sphere, and we cannot rely on tools developed by foreign powers. France must have its own tools." So Palantir is a U.S. company with major Pentagon contracts, including the $1.3 billion AI contract we covered when looking at Trump stock trades last month. France's decision is a part of a broader European push toward AI sovereignty and the idea that European governments should not be dependent on American or Chinese infrastructure for sensitive functions. And after that, Palantir shares actually fell 1.5% in pre-market on the news. And this is not a procurement division or decision. It's a signal about how European governments are thinking about U.S. technology companies in the post-Iran war environment, where the transatlantic relationship is already stained. If other European governments are going to follow through France's lead on AI procurement, Palantir's government contract pipeline are going to face a meaningful headwind. So, and those are all the situations that are coming out as news as of this morning and as of midday here on Sabre. So that's the show, Monday, June 22nd, and Britain is going to have a new political chapter opening up today for the 7th time in 10 years, and whether Andy Burnham can actually stabilize UK governance, where 6 predecessors could not, is the very question that is going to define British politics through the next election. And in Switzerland, Iran said yes to IAEA inspectors for the first time since this war began, and that matters. The 60-day nuclear clock is running with more substance than behind it than it had a week ago, and the Lebanon deconfliction cell is the real first test, and Israel is already saying it's going to stay put. And that PCE report is the market story of the week, with oil falling and the Fed already leaning hawkish. That number is going to tell you where the rates are going to go in the second half of this year. And everything's all sourced. All links are in the description. And remember, this is all for you to decide. I'm Elijah Iraheta here over at Sabre News, the editor-in-chief. Thank you for watching Digital Newsroom, and have a wonderful rest of your Monday.